Shelley wrote Ode to the West Wind in Italy in 1819. The poem is composed of 5 parts of 14 lines each, composed of 5 sonnets. 2 themes are discussed in Ode to the West Wind. The first theme is death and rebirth. The poem describes the west wind as a powerful and destructive force, a force that drives away the summer and brings instead winter storms, chaos, and even death. A destructive force, but a destruction that leads to renewal and rebirth. The west wind is presented as a destroyer and a preserver, as seen in last line of part 1. And these are the traditional names of the 2 Hindu gods, Shiva and Vishnu. Vishnu's role is to preserve the world. Shiva is supposed to destroy it. The west wind therefore combines these 2 opposite figures. As the speaker in the poem or the poet announces in the final lines of part 5, a wind, if winter comes, can spring be far behind. The west wind is able then to merge these opposites, winter and spring, winter as the season of death and spring as the season of rebirth. The west wind can merge these opposites because death is required for life and winter for spring. You cannot have spring without preceding winter. You cannot have life and rebirth without preceding death. In order to have the beautiful renewal and rebirth that spring promises, one needs the powerful destructive force of the west wind. The second theme is poetry and rebirth. Shelley praises and celebrates the west wind's destructive and chaotic power. Such destruction is necessary, as I said, for rebirth and renewal. Shelley is so fascinated with the power of the west wind to the extent that he wants to absorb the west wind, to adopt it into his own poetry. The poet describes himself as a diminished person, chained and bowed, as said in last stanza of part 4. Rather than condemning the destructive power of the wind, he hopes the wind will revive him from his status of being chained. Then the wind simply becomes the poet. The wind becomes the poet, or becomes part of him. Be thou me, he says, talking to the wind. Be thou me, that's stanza 2 of part 5. Then the poet proposes more complicated interactions between himself and the wind. He asks the wind to make me, quote, to make me thy lyre. Lyre as a musical instrument. Make me thy lyre, even as the forest is. Even as the forest is. Stanza 1 of part 5. In other words, he wants to be a musical instrument, specifically the lyre, the musical instrument that poets traditionally play while they perform their poems. He finds pleasure in becoming a musical accessory to the wind. The poet doesn't take an active role. He imagines the wind driving, quote, my dead thoughts over the universe, end quote, stanza 3 of part 5. So the poet wants to be or help the west wind because he wants to create something new. He wants to create something new to clear away the old or the dead, as the west wind does. Under the west wind's influence, dead thoughts will quicken a new birth, stanza 3 of part 5. We don't exactly know what new thing Shelley hopes to create. It might be a new kind of poetry, or it might be a new kind of society. Some people think that the poem is a call for a political change. For the poet, that novelty, that change, cannot be achieved through a compromise between the old and the dead. It can emerge only through a cleansing destruction that the west wind brings. Put an end, that is, to the old things to allow for something new.